The human brain reached its current size roughly 300,000 years ago. By 100,000 years ago, it had achieved the globular shape associated with language, abstract reasoning, and social complexity. The hardware was complete. A person born in the Ice Age, raised in the modern world, could learn calculus, write code, or build a skyscraper. Yet the standard historical narrative tells us that civilization, sedentary urbanism, agriculture, monumental architecture began only 6,000 years ago in Sumer. This leaves a gap of 294,000 years. 98% of our existence as a species lived in silence. Either humans were inexplicably dormant for nearly all of their history, or something kept erasing the evidence. 300,000 years is not a short time. It encompasses roughly 12,000 human generations. During that span, the planet cycled through multiple ice ages and warm periods. Sea levels rose and fell by hundreds of feet. Coastlines shifted. Rivers changed course. Forests became deserts, and deserts became grasslands. And through all of it, anatomically modern humans existed. People with our exact skeletal structure, our lung capacity, our vocal anatomy, our brain volume. The fossil record confirms this. Jebel Irhoud in Morocco yielded skulls dated to 315,000 years ago. The brain cases are slightly more elongated than ours, but the volume falls within the modern range. Homo kibish in Ethiopia produced remains from 233,000 years ago with fully modern proportions. By 100,000 years ago, the human skull had completed what paleoanthropologists call the globularity phase. The brain became rounder, expanding the parietal lobes and cerebellum, the regions responsible for tool use, spatial reasoning, and fine motor control. This is the architecture that allows us to thread needles, carve sculptures, and build machines. For 294,000 of those 300,000 years, we are told, humans accomplished nothing that left a mark. No cities, no agriculture, no domesticated animals, no stone monuments beyond scattered megaliths, no writing, just small bands of hunter-gatherers moving with the seasons, leaving behind stone tools and occasional graves. The standard model frames this as stasis, a long, uneventful prologue before the real history begins. But stasis is statistically strange. Humans are curious, competitive, and inventive. They experiment, they innovate. They pass knowledge to the next generation and build on it. If that process was active for even a fraction of 294,000 years, something should have emerged. A temple, a terraced field, a harbor, a road. The absence is not just silence. It is a void that demands explanation. Consider the tracking skills of a sand bushman in the Kalahari. He can identify an individual antelope by the shape of its hoof print. He can estimate its age, sex, and health from the depth and spacing of the tracks. He can predict where it will go next by reading vegetation disturbance and wind direction. This is not rote memorization. It is pattern recognition on par with a forensic analyst or a statistical modeler. The brain is performing complex computation. It is simply being applied to a different data set. The same principle applies to oral tradition. Australian Aboriginal songlines encode navigation, water sources, seasonal animal behavior, and ecological knowledge across thousands of square kilometers. The information is accurate enough to guide people across deserts for weeks without error. It is a database, stored in memory and transmitted through performance. The absence of writing does not mean the absence of complexity. Intelligence is not cumulative in the individual. It is cumulative in the culture. The reason we can build rockets and split atoms is not because we are smarter than Ice Age humans. It is because we inherited a knowledge base built over millennia. Writing stores information outside the brain. Mathematics formalizes patterns. Metallurgy builds on generations of trial and error. Remove those systems, and modern humans would revert to the same subsistence strategies as their ancestors. So the question becomes sharper. If humans are inherently inventive and the hardware was ready by 100,000 years ago, why did civilization take 94,000 more years to appear? One possibility is that it didn't, that it appeared and was destroyed multiple times. The Earth is not a museum. It is a recycling plant. The materials we associate with advanced civilization, steel, concrete, plastic, are chemically unstable on geological timescales. They decompose, corrode, and crumble back into elemental components. The timeline is faster than most people realize. Asphalt roads begin breaking down immediately after they are poured. Ultraviolet radiation oxidizes the bitumen. Water seeps into cracks and expands when it freezes. Plant roots penetrate from below. Without maintenance, a modern highway degrades into rubble within 50 years. Vegetation reclaims it within a century. Concrete is no better. Roman concrete, made with volcanic ash and seawater, can last millennia. Modern reinforced concrete cannot. The steel rebar inside it is the fatal flaw. Water penetrates the concrete through microscopic pores. It reaches the rebar and causes oxidation. Rust occupies more volume than steel. The expansion generates internal pressure, and the concrete spalls. Cracks propagate. Chunks fall away. Most modern skyscrapers have a functional lifespan of 50 to 100 years without active repair. In 1,000 years, they would be unrecognizable mounds. Steel itself oxidizes. In a humid environment, iron returns to iron oxide, rust, within centuries. A steel bridge exposed to rain and salt air will collapse in less than 100 years. In 1,000 years, it is dust. Glass is stable but brittle. It shatters. Over millennia, it is ground back into sand. Plastics photodegrade. Sunlight breaks the polymer chains into smaller and smaller fragments. Eventually, they become microplastics, particles too small to see but chemically detectable. A plastic bottle does not last forever in any recognizable form. It becomes molecular debris. The only materials that endure deep time are stone, fired ceramics, and gold. Stone does not corrode. Pottery, once fired, is chemically similar to rock. It can shatter, but the shards persist. Gold does not oxidize or tarnish. These three materials survive. Everything else vanishes. This creates a bias. We find stone tools in the archaeological record, not necessarily because stone was the only material early humans used, but because stone is the only material that survived. We assume they lived in the Stone Age because stone is what remains, but stone may have represented 1% of their material culture, the other 99%. Woven baskets, leather garments, wooden structures, bone tools, rotted away millennia ago. Now scale that process up. Imagine Manhattan abandoned tomorrow. Within 500 years, the skyscrapers would be skeletal frames, rusted and collapsing. Within 5,000 years, they would be low mounds of rubble, overgrown with forest. Within 10,000 years, only the deepest granite foundations might remain, buried under sediment. A geologist drilling a core through the site might find a thin layer of refined metals, copper, aluminum, steel alloys. But without context, it could be dismissed as a natural anomaly. The city itself would be invisible. 10,000 years is 1/30th of the time anatomically modern humans have existed. In 2018, NASA climate scientist Gavin Schmidt and astrophysicist Adam Frank published a paper titled The Silurian Hypothesis. The name references a science fiction species. If an industrial civilization existed on Earth millions of years ago and lasted only a few hundred years, would we be able to detect it in the geological record? The answer they arrived at is no, not with current methods. Industrial civilizations are brief. Our own has lasted roughly 200 years, from the coal-fired factories of the early 1800s to the present. On a geological timescale, 200 years compresses into a layer of sediment less than a millimeter thick. If that layer is not perfectly preserved, if erosion removes it, or if tectonic activity folds or subducts it, the evidence disappears entirely. Schmidt and Frank argue that physical ruins are unlikely to survive. What might survive are chemical signatures, specific isotopic ratios, synthetic elements, fossil molecules. Industrial fertilizer, for example, alters the nitrogen cycle. It enriches soil with nitrogen-15, a heavier isotope of nitrogen. This ratio can be detected in sediment cores. Burning fossil fuels releases carbon-12, the lighter isotope of carbon, shifting the global ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-13. This shift appears in ice cores, tree rings, and ocean sediments. The Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, 56 million years ago, shows exactly this signature. It is usually attributed to volcanic activity, but the paper notes that the signature is indistinguishable from industrial fossil fuel use. Nuclear fission produces elements that do not exist naturally. Plutonium-244, and curium-247 are transuranic. If found in a geological layer, they are proof of controlled nuclear reactions. No natural process creates them. Plastics leave a trace as well. When molten plastic mixes with sand, rock, and shell, it forms a new type of stone called plastiglomerate. This material has been found on beaches in Hawaii and other locations. It may be the only physical fossil of the 21st century that survives 1,000,000 years. But none of these signatures are easy to detect. They require precise geochemical analysis of sediment cores. Most geological surveys are not looking for them. The assumption has always been that pre-Holocene layers contain only natural processes. If an industrial phase occurred 500,000 years ago, its chemical fingerprint might have been drilled through and discarded as noise. 74,000 years ago, Mount Toba in Sumatra exploded. It was not a normal eruption. It was a supervolcano. The eruption column reached the stratosphere. Ash blanketed South Asia in a layer several meters thick. Sulfur aerosols spread globally, blocking sunlight and triggering a volcanic winter that may have lasted a decade. Genetic studies of modern human populations reveal something strange. All living humans trace their ancestry to a surprisingly small number of individuals who lived around this time. The global human population may have crashed to between 3,000 and 10,000 individuals. This is called a population bottleneck. The species nearly went extinct. The exact cause of the bottleneck is debated. Some researchers argue that Toba was the trigger. The volcanic winter collapsed food systems. Tropical forests died. Megafauna populations crashed. Humans, already thinly spread across Africa and Eurasia, were pushed to the edge of survival. Others argue that the bottleneck was already underway due to climate shifts, and Toba simply accelerated it. Either way, the result is the same. If a nascent civilization existed before Toba, if early humans had begun experimenting with sedentism, plant cultivation, or social hierarchy, it would have been obliterated, not just the structures, the population itself. Any knowledge base would have died with its carriers. The survivors would have been scattered bands struggling to find food in a world stripped of vegetation. Recovery would have taken millennia. This is not speculation. We know the population crashed. We know Toba erupted at the same time. The question is whether humans at 74,000 years ago were still purely nomadic, or whether they had begun to organize in ways that left no trace. Between 42,000 and 41,000 years ago, the Earth's magnetic field collapsed. The poles flipped. For roughly 1,000 years, the planet's magnetic shield dropped to less than 6% of its current strength. This event is called the Laschamp excursion, named after the lava flows in France where it was first detected. The magnetic field is not decorative. It deflects charged particles from the sun, the solar wind, and blocks high-energy cosmic rays from deep space. Without it, those particles strike the atmosphere directly. They ionize molecules. They generate secondary radiation. They destroy ozone. The ozone layer absorbs ultraviolet radiation. When it is damaged, UV levels at the surface spike. Prolonged exposure causes skin cancer, cataracts, and immune suppression. It also damages plant DNA, reducing photosynthesis and collapsing food chains. The flip itself was not instant. The magnetic poles wandered erratically for centuries before reversing. During the transition, the field did not simply weaken. It fractured into multiple competing poles. Compasses, had they existed, would have spun uselessly. The aurora borealis, normally confined to polar regions, would have appeared at mid-latitudes. The sky would have burned with shifting curtains of red and green light, visible even at the equator. A 2021 paper by Cooper and colleagues connected the Laschamp event to mass extinctions. The Australian megafauna, giant wombats, marsupial lions, 2-ton kangaroos, disappeared during this window. So did the Neanderthals. The timing is precise. The evidence came from an unexpected source: Kauri trees in New Zealand. Ancient logs preserved in wetlands contained growth rings spanning the Laschamp period. The rings recorded atmospheric carbon-14 levels, which spiked during the magnetic collapse. Cosmic rays, no longer deflected by the magnetosphere, bombarded the upper atmosphere and created the isotope in abnormal quantities. The trees had absorbed the catastrophe in their wood. Humans survived, but their behavior changed. Cave art explodes during this period. Sites across Europe, Chauvet, Lascaux, Altamira, show sophisticated paintings of animals, handprints, and abstract symbols. Red ochre use increases dramatically. Ochre is a natural sunscreen. It blocks UV radiation. Some researchers argue that humans were forced underground to escape the radiation, and they spent that time painting. If any surface-dwelling civilization existed during the Laschamp event, it would have been sterilized. Agriculture would have collapsed under UV stress. Coastal settlements would have been abandoned as ozone depletion made daylight lethal. The event lasted 1,000 years. That is 50 human generations. Long enough to erase not just structures, but cultural memory. 12,800 years ago, the Earth was warming. The Ice Age was ending. Glaciers were retreating. Sea levels were rising. And then, abruptly, the warming stopped. Temperatures plunged. The planet re-entered a mini ice age that lasted 1,200 years. This period is called the Younger Dryas. The cause is disputed. The mainstream explanation is a disruption in ocean circulation. Melting glaciers released massive amounts of fresh water into the North Atlantic, shutting down the Gulf Stream and triggering a feedback loop of cooling. But an alternative hypothesis has gained traction in recent years. In 2007, a team of researchers proposed that fragments of a disintegrating comet struck the northern hemisphere. They pointed to a layer of sediment found across North America and parts of Europe, dated precisely to 12,800 years ago. This layer contains nanodiamonds, microscopic crystals formed only under extreme pressure and heat. It also contains microspherules, tiny metallic droplets created when rock melts and cools rapidly. And it contains elevated levels of platinum, an element rare on Earth but common in comets. Greenland ice cores from the same period show a sharp spike in platinum concentration. The timing matches the sediment layer. Beneath the layer, charcoal and soot indicate massive wildfires. Some estimates suggest 10% of the Earth's biomass burned within a matter of weeks. If the impact occurred over the Laurentide ice sheet, the massive glacier covering Canada and the northern United States, it would have released catastrophic amounts of meltwater. Sea levels would have risen by meters within days. Every coastal settlement, every river delta, every low-lying plain where humans tend to build would have been drowned. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis remains controversial. Critics argue that the nanodiamonds and platinum could have other sources. The paper presenting the ice core data has been disputed, but the sediment layer itself is real. The charcoal layer is real. The timing of the climate shift is real. Something happened 12,800 years ago. At the same time, megafauna extinctions accelerated. Mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, and short-faced bears disappeared. Clovis culture in North America, known for its distinctive stone tools, vanished from the record. The human population of the Americas may have crashed. If a complex society existed before the Younger Dryas, it would have faced multiple simultaneous catastrophes: wildfires, flooding, instant winter, agricultural collapse. The survivors would have been reduced to subsistence hunting and gathering. Any knowledge of architecture, astronomy, or agriculture would have survived only as fragments, myths, half-remembered techniques, or isolated monuments. 11,500 years ago, a site in southeastern Turkey was built. It is called Göbekli Tepe. The structures are stone circles made of T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing more than 20 tons. The pillars are carved with reliefs of predators, lions, foxes, scorpions, vultures, and abstract symbols. The site is geometrically aligned. It required hundreds of workers, logistical coordination, and stoneworking expertise. According to the standard archaeological timeline, Göbekli Tepe predates agriculture by 500 years. It predates pottery. It predates the wheel. It predates permanent settlements. The people who built it were supposedly hunter-gatherers, living in small, mobile bands. Yet they transported multi-ton stones across kilometers of terrain, erected them in precise configurations, and carved them with sophisticated imagery. Then they buried the site deliberately, filling the chambers with rubble and sealing them. There are no practice runs, no earlier versions, no simpler prototypes. Göbekli Tepe appears fully formed. One interpretation is that this marks the beginning of civilization, that the act of building the site itself triggered the cognitive and social changes that led to agriculture and urbanism. the temple before the city model. Another interpretation is that Göbekli Tepe is not a beginning, but an ending, that it represents the last gasp of a much older tradition built by people who remembered something from before, knowledge passed down from survivors of the Younger Dryas, who had once lived in a more complex world and were now rebuilding from fragments. This is not proof, but it is a pattern. The Neolithic Revolution, the transition to farming, animal domestication, and settled life, occurs almost simultaneously across multiple regions after the Younger Dryas: the Fertile Crescent, the Yangtze River Valley, the Andes, Mesoamerica. Within a few thousand years, all of these regions independently develop agriculture. Either this is convergent evolution, triggered by climate stabilization after the Ice Age, or it is reemergence, the rediscovery of techniques that had been practiced before and lost. The Amazon provides a recent lesson in invisibility. In 2024, researchers using LiDAR, a remote sensing technology that strips away vegetation, discovered a network of cities in the Upano Valley of Ecuador. The sites date to 2,500 years ago. They include wide roads, plazas, and earthwork platforms. The scale is comparable to Roman-era London. The structures were built with earth and mud, not stone. Rain and jungle growth buried them. For 2 millennia, they were invisible. If archaeologists had relied on ground surveys alone, they would never have been found. The Amazon was not a pristine wilderness. It was a managed landscape, supporting millions of people, and it was hidden for 2,000 years. If complexity can disappear for 2 millennia, what can disappear for 20? Ice Age coastlines are now 400 feet underwater. During the last glacial maximum, sea levels were lower, and much of the continental shelf was exposed. These would have been prime locations for settlement: flat terrain, access to both marine and terrestrial resources, river estuaries for navigation. When the ice melted, those coastlines drowned. Anything built there is now submerged. Sundaland, the landmass that connected Southeast Asia during the Ice Age, is now the Java Sea, the Gulf of Thailand, and the shallow waters between Indonesia and Malaysia. Less than 1% of the submerged continental shelf has been surveyed archaeologically. The absence of evidence from these regions is not evidence of absence. It is evidence that we have not looked. We do not need to imagine an Atlantis with flying machines and laser weapons. The civilization that might have been lost does not need to resemble ours. It could have been a maritime culture, using wooden ships that rotted away. It could have been focused on botany and ecology, terraforming landscapes without leaving stone monuments. It could have used geothermal energy, woven shelters, and biodegradable tools. The Roman Empire lost the recipe for concrete after it fell. For 1,000 years, people in Europe lived among the ruins of aqueducts and amphitheaters and believed that giants must have built them. The knowledge had been lost within a few generations. If Rome could lose concrete, what have we lost that we do not know we have lost? The 294,000-year gap may not be a gap at all. It may be a series of rises and falls, written in materials that did not survive, erased by catastrophes that reset the world, and buried under 400 feet of seawater. We are not necessarily the first civilization. We may simply be the latest. The one that happened to arise during a geologically calm period, with enough time to write things down before the next reset begins. Human history is not a line. It is a spiral, and we are still climbing.